You can hear us? All right.
All right.
Before we start, we wanted to get an idea of how many of you are interested in social entrepreneurship. Can you show some hands? That's pretty amazing, isn't it? What is social entrepreneurship?
You know, I have no idea.
I don't either.
But
It'll be a very short talk then.
But I did want to check in because when I got the invitation to come talk with you, you know, I kind of looked back at my work and I thought, wow, there's a lot of nonprofit work there, and I wonder, you know, if they know about that or, you know, or whatever. And so I was figuring out how much time to spend on that.
Well, can we, what kinds of investments or social entrepreneurship have you done?
Well, so for those of you who don't know, I was in the film school here and was a filmmaker and founded a thing called the Filmmakers Collaborative, which basically came about because when I was making the second film, Ratchet, I was looking for a community kind of place to make the film out of. This is in the 90s, as you know, indie film was kind of pretty ascendant, and there was no, you know, other than the Tribeca Film Center, which had, in my opinion, kind of reneged on their promise to open up to the community. I mean, you could really only afford to do that if you had a 3-picture deal. There was that, super expensive, and then there was the shooting gallery, and then there was nothing else. And so we got some investors together, bought a building down on Green Street that used to be an old recording studio where Dylan recorded and Stones recorded. And we created this community space with editing suites and meeting rooms and producer offices. And a lot of great films came out of there. The last one before we closed it was Sandy Dabowski's Trembling Before God. Mm-hmm. But it was really, we only had 3 rules. You had to have a budget under, I think it was under $500,000, which in those days was pretty considerable still. And it couldn't be about the money. So that was the budget limit. No porn, because it wasn't about the money, and then and no commercials. And yeah, it was a cool atmosphere, and that led to I-Beam, because new media art was having some of the same problems that indie film was. So
tell me about I-Beam, or tell them about I-Beam. I actually heard about I-Beam, but probably predates many of them.
Yeah, I'm sure. How many people here have heard of I-Beam? Oh my God, that's more than more than I thought. Okay, so as films that seem more like TV shows to me, like The Brothers McMullen started coming out, my interest in film was waning compared to some of the work I saw friends doing in new media art, and the questions they were asking were really interesting, and they were provocative, and there was some activism going on that was cool, I thought. And I was like, wow, these guys have the same problem. They're trying to make this interesting work on the internet. There's no access to tools, all this stuff. We could do something kind of similar. And so we were able to launch this thing, and that is really, most people don't know about this. You've probably read or come across or seen, you know, reference to BuzzFeed, and there have been articles written about BuzzFeed, but most people don't know that the origins of BuzzFeed are really at this place called I-Beam. And that's not always typical for, you know, a for-profit, you know, the seeds of a for-profit to be born in a not-for-profit.
And that comes from, you hired a special gentleman named Jonah Peretti?
That's right, that's right.
Did you give him his first job out of MIT, or one of his first
no,
jobs?
he had been teaching down in New Orleans.
Right.
And so he had moved up to the city, and I was like, I'm looking for somebody who really understands the web. And Jonah had already done the Nike emails experiment. Anyone?
Do you know the Nike email experiment? You should talk about that.
Okay, so Jonah tells a better story than I do with this, but just really quickly, Jonah, remember how Nike would let you customize your sneakers? So he requested online the word sweatshop for his sneakers, and he got a form reply back. The word you selected is either profanity or forbidden IP or something like that. And he wrote back and was like, no, actually it's not. It's sweatshop. Here's the definition, and very straight. And gets a Nike rep writing him back, and this hilarious email exchange goes back and forth to like 8 emails back and forth, with Jonah finally closing it saying, well, can I at least have a picture of the small Asian kid who made my sneakers? and so he takes this collection of emails and he sends it to 12 friends. And within something like 2 months, over 1 million people had seen this collection of emails. And within 3 months, he was on the Today Show debating labor practices with a Nike rep. He knew nothing about labor practices, right? And he thought, and as he tells it, it occurred to him, oh my God, this is so powerful. This is so powerful. There's so many labor folks who would give their left pinky to be up where I am right now. And I'm here instead because I was able to do this thing. And so he was telling me about that. I knew about that already when we were meeting, and instantly we hit it off because we were both people who enjoyed, throwing rocks in the pond. So we decided to try and do more of that, and that's where the Contagious Media Lab happened at IBM. And so there were a couple of precursor projects, and I think we have some slides of them. So the Contagious Media Lab goal was to see if we could create some websites that would blow up on the internet. And we had some gut feelings about what would blow up and what wouldn't, what traits would help lead there. One of the first projects was something called Forget-Me-Not Panties. It's a product. Can we? Okay. So this is allegedly a pair of underwear that has a GPS tracker. This is before anybody knew what GPS was, and a thermometer. And it goes on. Ever worry about your wife cheating? Want to know where your daughter is late at night? All right. So this, I don't remember the precise web traffic that this got, but it did blow up, and it blew up. Two groups really helped it blow up. Feminists. So feminist groups found this website and were like, oh my God, I cannot, understandably, like, I cannot believe someone is selling this product. And the second group were Japanese fetishists. And fetish groups, and they were like, where can I get one? So that did really well. So one of the principles that we took away, that we saw acting here, is if you're thinking about, there's a room full of entrepreneurs, many of you are thinking about products. If there's a way for your product to be polarizing, you will certainly get a lot of exposure. Not certainly, but you can play that in a way to get a lot of exposure if you can find two groups to argue about your product. Let's go to the next one, the next Dog Island. All right, so
Sounds good.
So Dog Island is this place. If you're a city, you move to the city, maybe you go to NYU, you bring you're living off campus because you got your dog that you can't say goodbye to because you feel so guilty, but then you're here in the city and you feel guilty having your dog here, because it wants to run and play, and you can send your dog to Dog Island. And over 2,500 dogs are already enjoying a better life at Dog Island. So this picked up too. I think this was the brainchild of Paul Berry, who was formerly CTO of HuffPost. And he was part of our Contagious Media group. And there was actually there was some controversy with this too, but it was Easter egged. So it was hidden. And that is that if you researched, all right, so we got a letter from this 12-year-old girl who did this research. She researched the ownership of the IP address. And that was assigned to a dogs as food kingpin in Hong Kong. So this 12-year-old girl, I think in Seattle, emailed Paul. Paul got the email that went to like info@Dog Island. Was like, I know what you're doing, and I'm going to stop you. Which is a beautiful thing. And the final, I think the final slide we have here, another one that really blew up more than these two is this.
Yes.
I don't know how many of you know about this site, blackpeopleloveus.com. It was purportedly the homemade site of this super self-satisfied white couple, Sally and Johnny, and they're just so psyched because they have black friends, and there are testimonials from their friends like, Sally loves to touch my hair. She always asks me how I got my hair to do this. And so this understandably really blew up, just like pointing at racism in a that is more subtle. I mean, maybe this feels totally overt to everybody, but I think it was subtle enough that people were like, is this real? And I remember when this was up, I was at a table at some charity event with a guy from the New York Times who thought it was real and was totally upset about it. Anyway, so that was the third project. So these were great experiments. And at some point, Jonah said to me, this is as he was kind of part-time HuffPost at that point, and then part-time. So he came to me and he was like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this kind of news site. I think you'd be interested in.
But before that, weren't you an investor in Huffington Post?
Right. So he was like, hey, this woman, Ariana, wants to talk to you about investing in it. And so...
That turned out really badly for you, right? Yeah. AOL bought Huffington Post for $300 and something million.
Yeah.
You can't divulge that, right?
It was definitely a fun thing for me.
But what made you invest?
So I think something kind of similar to the reason I started Filmmakers Collaborative and iBeam, which was that my politics on a lot of vary, I'm like Chris Rock says, I'm conservative about some issues, I'm liberal about some issues. And but I had noticed that progressives were getting kind of what I thought of as like unfairly hammered in some media areas. There just was no outlet, and I thought this could really fly from a business point of view too. Mm-hmm. Like this is a missing piece, and kind of like my own personal interest and my business interests, met together, and I thought this is really good. And then I really believed in Jonah because we had been working together, and I was like, here is somebody who really understands the internet and has some insights into why people are sharing things, and this could be really good. And then I met Ariana, who has this amazing outsized personality loaded with charisma, And I thought, oh boy, so she can handle all the kind of like old media side of things. She's going to kill there, and Jonah can kill on the new media side of things, and together they're going to be pretty unstoppable, and they were.
Right. And so he came to you I don't know how long he was at Huffington Post, but it was a few years at least?
Yeah, well, these things were all overlapping. It's the
Right.
funny thing. It was all sort of in the family. And
What was his pitch on what became BuzzFeed to you?
well, that was back when we were doing those websites. He's like, John, I think there's a business idea here. I was like, yeah. I mean, here were two nonprofit arts guys, like, let's do a business. Yeah, let's do a business. Sure, that sounds good. And then we were ready. I think there was a point with HuffPost where he just felt like he was ready to try his own thing, and I was ready at that point to do it, and that's when we launched. And originally we were just going to be a tech company. That was that's what if you're as everybody here knows, the tech company valuations tend to be much higher than the media company valuations on average. And so we were thinking, we want this to be big and, whatever. And we related to internet culture. And so we thought tech platform at first. And of course, everything changed.
Mm-hmm. Well, what made you change?
That's a great question. I think there were a lot of there were a number of forces. I think a key one was that what we were doing was actually kind of hard. In other words, like creating stuff and blowing it up. And I feel like places like Upworthy have been able to codify that now in a way that we weren't doing then.
Until Google changes the rules on you.
Right. But I think at some point we're like, let's get around to the platform part, but first let's just try and nail this. I think it was just the idea of doing really good native advertising.
Mm-hmm. From the business side, you mean, or from the right? Because I've heard Jonah speak many times. He's come to my classes, and if you ever get a chance to catch him, you really should, because he's very funny.
His sister is Chelsea Peretti, who's on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and she's incredibly funny. I think Jonah is equally funny.
Yeah, very funny. He could be a stand-up comedian.
Yeah.
But I've heard him describe BuzzFeed as kind of like a cafe, where you go to a cafe and you want to look at cat photos, but you also want to read something serious, and that none of us are one of anything or one of everything. So they try to, they've worked really hard to offer a great diversity of material on the site. So from the native advertising side, though, which is fairly contentious in the world of journalism, we'll talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, so I think it is definitely contentious. I think in the end, I want to read ads. I want to be exposed to ads that are stuff that I actually want to see. And I think in the media world, there's a little bit of this. There are these kind of cultural conceits, and this is my own opinion, by the way. This is not the opinion of BuzzFeed or Ben Smith or Jonah. But I think there are these kind of cultural conceits about objectivity, which I think is actually impossible to achieve. Journalistic objectivity. I think that's I spend all my days now in a social science context, and I actually know that there's no, like from a science point of view, that's just total bullshit. So I want to see ads that I like, and if I could, I'd be happy about seeing ads that I would want to share. Like, can you imagine a world where ads were so good, you'd be like, hey, look at this ad. That'd have to be a pretty high bar, but why not try and hit that high bar? I mean, that would be my first.
I guess from the editorial side, it's the closer that an ad looks like the editorial content, the better it is for the advertiser, but the worse it is for the publication, you can argue. Mm-hmm. So that's, I think, comes from the, I don't think objectivity really is the issue as much as it's the confusion over what is an ad and what is not an ad.
I just meant that objectivity is another kind of what I think of as like a cultural conceit that doesn't have legs in the end. But that's
now you went back to school after IBeam, and I guess after BuzzFeed. I'm not sure the timing, but you went back to school after BuzzFeed to study virality, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So
you don't have to mention the school uptown that he attended if you don't want.
No, so as we were starting BuzzFeed, a lot of people were coming to me with videos for social issues and environmental issues that they cared about and saying, hey, can you help me make this go viral? And most of the time when I'd see this stuff, I'd think, oh my God, there's no chance of this taking off. And at the same time, I've always had an interest in behavioral psychology and decision science, and friends of mine who are academics were passing these papers to me, and I'm reading this research. I'm like, wow, none of this is getting incorporated into media. And I looked a little further afield at some of the advertising that would, in first, I was like, wow, it's only getting used in a kind of ad hoc way here. And I thought, that's it, I'm gonna start an agency that's gonna help people integrate academic theory in an organic way to make this stuff 10 times better. And I just thought, man, I've got this great idea. I was so excited about that. And then I started to think about like, well, how would I measure what 10 times better was? And I did a deep dive lit review into how people were measuring social impact. And for branded entertainment, things like that. And I saw they were measuring it with Facebook likes and monthly UVs. And I thought, holy smokes, people are measuring social impact with Facebook likes? That is crazy. That's like, what relationship to ground truth does that really have? And I thought, I was thinking about the data that I'd been exposed to at BuzzFeed, and I thought, wow, there's an opportunity here. And so I went back to school to an applied quantitative research program, and just like dropped everything and did that, and found just like a group of researchers and data scientists who were also interested in tackling a big, hairy, juicy cheeseburger. Those two things don't go together, do they?
I hope not. It would be viral if you made one. Yes.
Let's just say a big, juicy cheeseburger. Apologies to vegetarians of a problem, and so we've been tackling that for the last 6 years now, and having a lot of fun and making a lot of progress.
I mean, at Panda, we find that the number of tweets something gets out there in a story has nothing to do with the amount of traffic we get on the story. So to us, it's as mysterious as anything. Yeah. We just measure page views and unique visitors and time on the site, reading the articles. We can do that, but the social media aspects seem to there is no connection at all. But I guess I want to ask you is like, well, what are some of the characteristics of something that people will willingly share?
Right. So I think just going back to some of the lessons we learned in the Contagious Media Lab, I think when things when something is acting as a polarizer between two groups, you'll often see it take off. Also, if something, and this is totally unscientific and kind of anecdotal on my part, but, and I'm thinking of something my friend Jamie Wilkinson said, who's a former IBM fellow and is the founder of VHX, which you should check out. It's a platform for, if you don't know it, for selling your media. He said, if something seems too good to be true, that's a great element for virality. Like, and one other thing to note, some friends of mine who are at Microsoft Research recently showed me some study they had been doing, and which showed that there's almost no viral behavior online. Like they took some great examples. I can't remember if they did Kony 2012, but they looked at a bunch of examples and including actual viruses, like organic viruses, and the network map, so they're spreading. And you see that, in fact, there's we think of viral behavior as starting in a single place and then, going out, branching out quickly from these networks, but originating with a single node and then another node, like Jonah's Nike email. In this case, in most of these cases, you get this kind of broadcast shape, and I think this is something else to keep in mind. Like, I'm telling people this as you're thinking about marketing a product or something like that. You might not actually want to shoot for virality. You might want to try and, the other way to think about it is this broadcast model where you have a megaphone like Panda or Buzzfeed, and you can do an initial blast. And most of the stuff that we saw that blew up really big had some kind of
media component
that allowed a broadcast model where it didn't start with a single node. So I think a lot of people kind of get depressed. They try and make something viral, and they try and fail and fail and fail, and it's actually super, super hard. So Jonah talks about this a fair amount, so if you Google his talks, you'll learn more.
And also very hard to replicate. You can have the one-off, and that's great, and then nothing. So I think maybe from the broadcast perspective, what you get is, it takes like 5 years to build a media brand, 5 to 10 years. And once you have a media brand, then you have built-in amplification of anything that you post. Yeah. So I could imagine that if you're getting coverage in a bunch of different publications, you're actually getting several nodes at the same time that are amplified, which would be much more effective than just to try to spread things word of mouth.
Right, and from a strategy point of view, I don't think virality is a really smart strategy either, because most of us, whether we're trying to target, we're generally trying to target a particular consumer group, and it's one of the things we learned at Harmony Institute is it's a lot better to really be doing your market research on them and understand, so we do, huge data scoops. We look at all the linguistics, the frames and metaphors that they understand a particular topic through, so those get mirrored, and so you're really making sure you're speaking to your particular group. And usually then, if you've got that, you've achieved your goal.
Mm-hmm. How many people out here plan one day to launch their own company? Bunch of people? I knew it, that's good. All right, so what advice would you have for people that want to start a company? Maybe they don't have resources, maybe they don't have money behind them, or maybe they have a lot of debt. So what advice would you give for somebody who has probably a wonderful idea, but then where do you go with that wonderful idea?
Right, so I think partnering with really good people, making sure that, if you listening to that inner voice, I don't mean it, I guess I'm starting with something negative here, but just if you're thinking about partnering with someone and there's a little voice inside of you that's like, I'm not sure about this person, and maybe this sounds obvious, but hold off and wait for there to be some kind of magic, because it's probably going to be something you're going to be involved in for a fair amount of time, and you don't want to be stuck with. That's actually a really big deal. I just feel like, just making sure your day-to-day existence isn't miserable, because if you're in a super tough grind, as you know, because you've been here in school, and that's been something of a grind, you want to be around really smart people, where you can build ideas together. I think also being really careful about, depending on what kind of business you're going to be in, about listening to people like me, who are older than you, who are saying, Sonny boy, this is the way it works. Like, in my experience, probably better off not actually listening to anything I've said. Sorry.
Okay, go home now. Well, then, also as somebody who's invested in a couple of pretty big companies, what is an effective way for someone to approach an investor? I'm sure like you like it when people stake out your brownstone in Brooklyn and wait for you and just to give you their elevator pitch, right? Is that what they should do?
No, probably not. But in terms of that kind of thing, I think just make sure what you're proposing is certainly research your investor, right? And find the people where this thing is in their wheelhouse, that you're thinking of, as opposed, unless you're going to your uncle or someone like that. And I think that's step one. It's like for me, my investments are either in tech or real estate, and I find those to be a nice kind of balance. And so people have someone came to me with a clothing brand. I was like, what? I know nothing about this. Why would I? Your valuation seems sky high and crazy, and because I come from the tech world where valuations start very low and the initial investments are low and the risk is high, but anyway, so I think making sure that there's just a good fit. You'd be surprised how few people, it seems, are thinking about that. That would be one off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm. What about, New York has, obviously the tech scene and the startup scene has changed quite a bit in the last 10 years, I'd say.
Yeah.
I think you'd probably agree.
Yeah.
How has it changed?
So I feel like we saw this huge excitement about so-called, I hate this term, big data, which is really a term that describes a problem, and a lot of investors jumped in very early and got burned. And so now there is a fear I think there's a fear out there in the VC community, with exceptions, an angel community, of data-centered startups. But there are exceptions to that, and that's something I'm particularly interested in. Mm-hmm. And I think there's an opportunity right now there for that reason, actually, from an investor's point of view.
Mm-hmm. So, usually the characteristics when people talk about New York versus Silicon Valley or elsewhere, that one thing that's here, obviously, is the financial FinCEN, the financial technology, FinTech, the financial technology has a center here, media, advertising. Are there other areas besides big data, which you mentioned, which didn't work out so well?
Right.
But that was actually also Silicon Valley. But is there something that's, kind of New York-ish?
Well, I think the kind of stuff that my friend Kenny Lair is investing in is fits that. I think he's kind of nailed that.
What is he
New York
investing
scene. So he's a lot of direct-to-consumer stuff. They did, his son Ben did Thrill List, and I feel like New York kind of seemed to understand that better than the West Coast. What do people want to relate to online? Mm-hmm. And that might be shifting now, but that, like, historically for the last 5 or 6 years, maybe even longer, I feel like New York's done that better.
Mm-hmm. Can you give some examples of companies that many of us probably not have heard of, but you think are onto something?
Well, I would go back to VHX. I think VHX is very exciting.
And what is that?
So VHX is a platform through which you can sell your video. And what's his name? Asif, the comedian Asif Ansari uses it, and others use it, and I think it's what I love about it is that it's not cutting out the middleman. I mean, VHX is the middleman there, but it's really streamlining it in a way that makes sense for today, and it's moving towards this kind of new media model of really empowering creators, which I like. Coming from that background myself, I like businesses that are thinking about empowering you rather than taking 51%. And I think, I'm hoping they're going to win, but they're kind of they're also pitted against some old world media, like MPAA-backed standards and things like that I can't remember that. I don't even want to give it any press, so I'm not going to name it. But there's a kind of competition going on right now. But I would check out VHX. I think it's a really cool model. And there's also, well, I'll leave it at that for now because I'm forgetting the name of this.
All right. We talked briefly about patents, and I know that you've been active in trying to change the way things work. Can you address that a little bit? Because obviously, most of you, if you want a defensible product, you'll probably have to go through the patent system, and that is fraught with problems, right?
Yeah, well, it is, and IP reform is very near and dear to my heart. And I'm just friends with a lot of artists, and that's continually an issue. And IP law has just gotten to this place where and someone like Lawrence Lessig speaks on this, very eloquently. So I would, if you're interested in this issue, just read his books. But it's gotten to this, just crazy place. But my dad kind of one-upped me in a way. My dad is a sculptor. He did the guy checking his briefcase down at Ground Zero, and he did this. He's done other pieces here in the city and elsewhere at Giant in Washington, D.C. and stuff. And but he had his own approach. So he really wanted to do this. He really wanted to do this sculpture of, that famous picture of the sailor kissing the nurse? Okay, so there's a photograph that is owned by Time Warner, and they're notoriously litigious, and he wanted to make a sculpture of this, and a friend of mine who's an IP attorney was like, well, they're not going to let you do that. My dad said, oh yeah? Let me try this. And he wrote the head counsel and said, hey, I'm making this sculpture of this event, and you have this photograph of this event, and I would love for you to fund this. I would love for you to just fund the whole piece. And the head counsel wrote back, dear Mr. Johnson, how wonderful that you're doing this little sculpture project. Our funding is all spoken for, yours truly. Blah, blah, blah. And then my dad had this letter. So they knew about the piece. Yeah, exactly. And then he was able to make the piece, and their hands were totally tied because they completely embarrassed their head counsel. if they were to sue him. He created this. So you know, in terms of all our pranking that we were doing at IBM, I felt like my dad pulled off a really good one, an old school style.
I think we start questions. Yes? Is there a microphone to go around, or nope? Just, all right. You must have questions. Who has a question? Any hands? Yes, please.
So you mentioned, data on social impact and how people are measuring it in Facebook likes, and so what have you learned about like this? What do you find valid when measuring social impact?
Right, that's a great point. So there's validity. There's the issue of validity, and there's also the issue of causal inference and operational relevance. So you can have something can be valid in an operational relevance kind of way, like can you use this? And then something can be valid in a way where can you draw a pure line of causal inference to this? And those are two different things, and people confuse them a lot. That's why I'm bringing it up. So for an operational relevance perspective, one of the things that we've seen is you can monitor conversation in a smarter, deeper way using some machine learning techniques. I use, for a theoretical framework, there's this Dutch social scientist named Koopmans who did this project around neo-Nazis, showing that when there were certain kinds of press around issues, they could predict neo-Nazi mobilization. And this is like a 2004 paper, Koopmans. Anyway, so I took that and I was like, let's take one of our contentious issues, you know, that we like to look at IBM and other places, like fracking. Let's look at fracking, and let's look at a piece of media around that. And so I picked this film called Gasland. Has anybody here seen Gasland? Josh Fox made this film. So we would do things like, before that, we would do things like frame and metaphor diffusion studies. So we'd look at specific linguistic constructions. We'd code an entire piece of media for every frame and metaphor that's used in terms of specific linguistic constructions, like tax relief would be an example of a frame, you know, specific. And we do a pre and post study and see, you know, if there was a change, but now there's no causal inference tie there, but it kind of hints that there was impact, so that's one way. In this Gasland study, we actually used a machine learning technique called topic modeling, and topic modeling is very interesting for those of you who are interested in data science projects. So topic modeling gives you an idea not just of the keyword, it's like a super keywords that shows you hierarchies of content. So that enabled us to see that Josh Fox, as his movie premiered on HBO, started to dominate the conversation around fracking. So before Gasland came out, when people were talking about fracking, the dominant themes were energy companies and fracking techniques. And once Gasland came out, the metaphors that, and he had very smart metaphors in his film. He showed people lighting their tap water on fire, and he was telling a personal story that made it more powerful. Anyway, we started to see these things climb in the hierarchy of related topics around fracking. And then finally, as Koopman's study would have predicted, we saw New York State Legislature ban start to come up. So there are definitely ways to get at from an operational relevance point. So then I was sitting with, I don't want to go on and on about this, but I literally was talking with Josh Fox one day and just kind of by accident, an hour later, sitting being introduced to this lobbyist in a bar in Washington who was like, I'm really interested in this fracking thing too. You know, he was on the other side, and he was like, you know, I want to use it to reach Republican mothers and really kind of get away from this health frame and get to an energy independence frame. And he would have loved to have had that, to be out ahead of that and be able to counterspin Josh Fox's film.
Does so much of that come from storytelling?
It's all storytelling.
It's all storytelling. I remember the ads, which was always would have people, regular people, and talking about how wonderful it is that they have electricity.
Yeah. So it's storytelling, but combined with really, you know, knowing your audience, so you understand, you know, how to reach them to get them from where they are to where you'd like them to be.
Hi, I'm a big fan of some of the programs IBM is doing with youth, like wearable fashion or wearable technology. And my question is, how do you think we can engage youth in skills like computer programming and kind of capture their imagination while also letting them get a taste of what it's like to be in the environment where this work happens? It's not a conventional kind of place. A lot of youth all over New York are going to have no idea about data science or wearable technology or something like that. So I'm curious, how do we engage businesses and our youth to, especially in technology, to connect?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I don't know the answer. I mean, I feel like IBM's kind of getting at it, but there are very few people that I know of that are, you know, working on those programs. And I think that's a huge, I'd love to see more of that, especially around coding, but also around statistics. I think it's, you know, it kills me, you know, the lack of statistics literacy in kids kind of kills me, and there are ways to get at it that, well, I'd love to see more of that too. I don't know the answer there. I mean, you know, maybe it's like little mini I-beams. I don't know. I don't know, but that's a great thought. God.
Yep. Hi. Oh, we're here. Yeah. So I was just wondering, over here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I was just wondering, what do you think is going to be next for BuzzFeed? Like from 3 years from now,
Right.
What do you think is going to happen?
I think it would be, you know, I don't really know, but I think it would be pretty cool if, so BuzzFeed now is a big media company, and you know, it has a lot of other media companies worried, and it's getting to the size now where it probably cannot be acquired. Like the pool of folks that could acquire it is really shrinking. I think it would, I'm hoping, you know, I think Jonah is still super interested in running it, and this blew my mind, by the way, because this is, you know, this skinny kid, not from New York, out of town, who was like, you know, a wonderful, super funny, geeky guy, and then he's turned into this brilliant CEO. You know, I've just like totally blew my mind, you know, over the years, seeing him build this big company. I'm hoping he continues with it, and that he takes it from a media company back into a platform, I think, or like a hybrid. He creates one of the first. I think if he does that, then he will have created, you know, like a Viacom for the 21st century, you know, some kind of new thing. I think that would be one of the most exciting things I could think of. I'd love to see that.
Hello, John. Thank you for doing this panel. In your words, what would you describe as like the mission statement of BuzzFeed?
Oh, I think to provide just the hottest, most shareable content on the web in an exciting way. I mean, you know, that's my own words.
Do you like lists?
I do like lists. So here's the thing, you know, I think BuzzFeed and other sites too have been, so I think there have been these two, one of the things we've come into at Harmony Institute is that it seems like there have been these two paradigms for looking at media and expression and communicating something. There's a paradigm that I think of as the Enlightenment group, and they are just man is a rational animal. If we present him with the facts, he will ineluctably be led to the proper conclusion. And they do some things really well. That group, like they are familiar with logic and present an argument and stuff like that, and then they totally miss most people because we're not, you know, people here, probably everybody here, you know, if they're in B schools, read Kahneman and Tversky, right, and decision science, we know that we have heuristics and shortcuts in our mind. We're not perfectly rational. So the other group are the romantics who are like, we can never logic out of this stuff. You just have to use your intuition, and then they miss this opportunity to be systematic and use like systematic rigor, and so they don't have the train of hits. So someone like Jonah has had, you know, like is taking what's good about the Enlightenment, which is a scientific method and thinking about things in a rigorous way, in a systematic way, and then, you know, he's also like a savant in terms of understanding what people want, but he's looking at that through this, you know, through the Enlightenment lens and understanding it better. So I think BuzzFeed is, you know, we all like lists, whether we admit it or not. The traffic shows that we do, you know. So I'm not alone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you. I feel like you've both taken us on this rich journey. And it's kind of like the little engine that could. It reminded me of that a bit. So my question's a current one about so when you needed to learn, you even went back to school when you didn't need to, whether it was ours or uptown. And I'm curious about what interests you the most now about what you're doing and why?
So I feel like media is this thing that everybody's talking about, and yet its influence is really pretty uninvestigated outside of an anecdotal framework. And there's just this huge opportunity. So to, you know, just take that Enlightenment lens, you know, and look at something systematically and rigorously.
And not just media, but also advertising.
Advertising, journalism,
It's just not,
Yeah.
it's more art than science right now. Yep.
Question over here. So as somebody who's been out there and has started companies and has basically changed the world, what would you say is the best use of our time as we're here, students and alumni, with other aspiring entrepreneurs? What's the thing that you think that we should be doing?
Oh, God.
Should I get you a throne?
Yeah. You know, be kind to others. You know, one of the things that I've learned at Harmony Institute is, in terms of being influential, so filmmakers will call us, filmmakers who have figured out what we're doing call us up and say, I'm making this film, I want to make it more influential. Tell me how to do that. And there were these filmmakers who were making a film about I'm going to get around to your point in an allegorical way. The few doctors who are still performing abortions. And so I said, answer a couple of these questions for me and I'll help you out once you answer them. What's your goal for this film? What group of people is instrumental to this goal? What NGO are you working with to understand whether your goal makes sense? And a couple of other questions. And they're like, maybe we'll call you back. And I didn't expect a call back. And then they did, and they said, thank you, 2 months later, thank you, we completely changed our distribution strategy. We're targeting medical schools now because we realized our greatest goal would be to influence more doctors. And we were going for they told me initially they were going for the largest possible general audience. So I think when you're thinking about influence, if I wanted to resist giving you a generalized response because I really, I haven't done my market research on this group. So I would say, I tend to want to give responses specific to particular interests, and I think that's the way to be more influential. I think so. I feel like if I offered you a kind of general thing, it wouldn't be that helpful.
I'll get more specific. So I think that while we're in school, we have an opportunity to connect with each other and to really do amazing things. And sometimes we don't fully utilize NYU, our time in school here, until later, and then realize that we had an opportunity that may have been missed. So for people who are in school for the one time in their life where they're paying to have access to all these other creative people, what can we do to be at the cutting edge?
So 2 things. One, I was just hearing about this lab that sounds amazing. And it seems like part of the reason that I started Filmmakers Collaborative and part of the reason I started iBeam was that there wasn't a space for people to meet up and create the collision of ideas, in an informal way. Here outside of the classroom, it sounds like this lab is going to be just that kind of space. I would also say, definitely this is your time to take risks. So Jonah and I had the benefit of this lab, lab full of anarchists and artists and educators and graffiti artists, and just to play. And so this is the time to play with ideas and to take risks. Again, I feel like, what a cliche. But I do think there are people I see getting real tight, looking at that world out there and starting to feel afraid. And when you start to feel afraid, you start to get tight. You start, and that's the worst thing that can happen in terms of your decision-making process, right? One of the worst things.
Another question? Yes?
So I wanted to ask about feature film, since you were involved in that. So we're actually at Tisch. I'm a film student right now, and we're generally encouraged to go towards television, as it's kind of the big. It's more popular right now. They say that's where the deeper stories are, that sort of thing. But where do you see feature film fitting in the media in 5-10 years' time?
Oh boy. Well, first of all, I think the whole golden age of television thing is a red herring. I think that television numbers are dropping precipitously, despite all the good shows. And as for feature film, I feel like these formats are. I don't remember what precise, my film school education is far enough behind me where I don't remember what prescribed that 90-minute format and what set of circumstances set that up. But I think what we're going to see are more interesting I think we're just going to see those boundaries dissolve. I mean, I hope so. I think one of the reasons that people are talking about TV more is that it's all about, as Adam was saying, it's all about story, and a huge component of story is character development. And when you have 12 episodes, maybe times 5 seasons, like for Walter White, right? To have that character development, that is just compelling, And again, it's people either stumbling on in a savant-like way or coming at it from a science way what people really want. So I think feature film is going to have to tackle that issue if it's going to survive.
I would just add 90 minutes comes from, it's the optimal length of time that you can cram in the most numbers of viewings at a theater. If you go longer than that, then you've got to cut a show, which cuts into the revenue, and that all art has an economic component to it.
Right.
And I won't, but I mean, when we time shift now and we watch shows without commercials, you're going to probably see that TV shows are going to come in different lengths now. Instead of the hour or half hour, or the 22-minute really with commercials versus the 40-minute or 42-minute or something like that with an hour-long show and the rest are commercials, you're going to see different, I think, lengths of time take over.
So we probably want to bet on the bets where the business impetus constraints are aligned with some kind of hedonic impulse, like the audience impulse. Anyway.
We'll have a longer conversation over scotch. All right. Thank you very much for coming, and let's give him a hand.
Thanks.